Muslim representation in the media has always been surrounded by Islamophobic stereotypes and myths that have led us to become one of the most misunderstood and hated groups of people. This goes way back to hundreds of years, where Arabic culture was coined as quote-unquote Muslim culture and was fetishized and used for the entertainment of non-Muslims in the West. Today, terrorist attacks by quote-unquote Islamic groups have led to a new wave of fear and dismay of Muslims and us practicing our beliefs. In today's video, I'm going to break down the myths and stereotypes surrounding Muslims that the media has fed us and how that unconsciously has installed biases and misperceptions of Islam as a faith and its people. Welcome back, or welcome to my channel, y'all. Today's video is going to be more of a video essay style of video. This topic is really big and there's a lot to talk about. There's a lot of research that I have done and that I could still be doing because there really is so much to discuss and so much to break down. But for the sake of this video, I have come up with 3 different chapters, and I will leave the timestamps of those in the description box below. But the first thing that we're going to talk about is Orientalism and Arabs depicted in media. So first, let's understand the definition of Orientalism. Orientalism, as described by Oxford Dictionary, means the representation of Asia, especially the Middle East, in a stereotypical way that is regarded as embodying a colonialist attitude. Orientalist views see the Middle East and Asia as exotic, and the people, especially the women, are often fetishized, and the men are seen as uncivilized, barbaric, and dangerous. Now, the Middle East is definitely the birthplace of Islam, but the media has done this thing where every single Muslim we see on TV is Arab, which only tells people that all Muslims are Arab, which is completely untrue. There are Muslims from all different countries, from every single continent, so we all look very different. There are brown Muslims, there are East Asian Muslims, there are even Latino Muslims, there are converts. So if we look at Muslims and what we look like physically, we look very different depending on who you're talking to. But again, the media has perceived all Arabs to be Muslim and then all Muslims are Arab. That completely disregards that a lot of these Middle Eastern countries that might be majority Muslim still have minority groups within them of people of different races who practice different religions, or even Arabs who are Christian and not Muslim. That is a thing that does exist. Arab and Muslim are not interchangeable terms. You cannot use them in the same way because they are very different things. A Muslim is somebody who believes in Islam. That's a religion. Arab is an ethnicity. Again, not interchangeable terms. If you look at a film such as Aladdin, you can see Orientalist caricatures on the Arab men in the film. Just look at Jafar and the guards, for example. They're all seen as aggressive men with hooked noses and darker skin than all the other characters. They are rude, they talk loudly. I mean, look at the guards compared to Aladdin. Aladdin doesn't look anything like them. He's a lot more whitewashed. His skin is lighter, his nose is smaller, and honestly, he doesn't really hold any features that are given to all the other Arab characters, or all the other Arab men at least. And I mean, even the few times that we do see women in Aladdin, aside from Jasmine, they are also seen through Orientalist views as belly dancers who are only there for the enjoyment of people. These women are depicted with a fanatical perception of who they might be, not who they really are. I mean, even belly dancing is super whitewashed in the media. The belly dancing that you probably have seen in Western film is not what belly dancing actually looks like in Arab cultures. And there's even the whitewashing of Arab culture, such as Cleopatra, which has been played by a white woman in the past, and Egyptian culture never being authentically depicted in media, but rather a fanatical obsession with the elements of Egyptian history that made great storylines. For the longest time, all Muslims have been put under this umbrella that we all must be Arab, and if we aren't Arab, then we aren't really seen as Muslim. Orientalist views have always oppressed people from the Middle East and Asia because our cultures were never really represented and were only used for enjoyment of other people. Now let's move on to the next myth, which is that all Muslims are extremists. One of the most common myths and stereotypes around Muslims is that all of us are extremists, that we're all especially religious and loathe all non-Muslims, keeping only to our own religious community and plotting against innocent people with terrorist attacks to instill fear and promote our religion to non-believers. In an article that I was reading called Hawk and Halal, Illuminating 100 Years of Muslim Tropes and How to Transform Them, it pointed out a study which says, and I quote, Several empirical studies have shown that there is no stronger link between violence and Islam than there is with any other religion. But 9/11 and other terrorist attacks, along with the current socio-political climate, has drilled into Europeans and many people of the Western world that Muslims support terrorism and identify strongly with their religion, which makes them inherently more violent.
I believe there are certain areas in Islam that needs to be reinterpreted. Otherwise, you will face violence at the end. Other religions have probably some texts that may lead to violence if you understood it literally. However, many of these religions have reformed already. Islam has not reformed yet. And the same anachronistic, old-fashioned ways of teaching are still today valid. And
is that a yes or a no? Is it more violent?
I believe with the literal understanding of it and with its history as written in Sharia books, today it is more violent.
Fuentes.
Yes, it must be. Otherwise, how could all these groups take the name of Islam to become violent and do what they do? They're the ones that call themselves Islamists. They're the ones, ISIS calling themselves the Islamic State. We didn't pin that name on them. We didn't say you're the non-Christian, you're the non-Jewish, the non-Buddhist, the non-Hindu, the non-Sikh. They said we're the Islamic State. So they're interpreting the teachings of the Prophet, the teachings of the Quran, and they're twisting it. They're putting it on it. But the fundamental basis is that they're calling themselves Islam and then cutting people's heads off.
Go ahead, Mr.
Wait,
Bakar.
Don. First of all, I find it absolutely astounding that a former assistant director of the FBI would say that Islam is a more violent religion than most other religions. If you look at the Lord's Resistance Army and Joseph Kony, that was made famous in the Kony 2012 campaign, that is a Christianist organization. You look at Christian extremist organizations here in the United States that have bombed gay nightclubs and abortion clinics in the name of Christendom. But every mainstream Christian knows that these are completely outside of any normative understanding.
By saying that Islam is more violent than any other religion, it doesn't mean that other religions aren't violent.
As an example, I'm going to use a show called Caliphate. Caliphate is about and based on a true story of ISIS, who are orchestrating a terrorist attack in Sweden, and two teenage girls who met undercover ISIS members who brainwashed them into converting and aiding in terrorist attacks, while also falling behind a woman who is living in the Islamic State and trying to escape. There is truth to this show which I think deserves to be talked about. The luring of these teenage girls is a true story that shouldn't go unexplored. However, because this show only perpetuates Islam as an extremist religion, and there's no effort to show the nuance to Muslims and Muslim communities, and the peace and the faith that doesn't include the support of terrorist attacks, the show only perpetuates these harmful stereotypes of Muslims, that if we're not the ones attacking, we're the ones supporting the attacks. When I watched Caliphate, it was a very hard to watch show because it is very sad. It's really sad to see these teenage girls get brainwashed into believing in these hateful ideas that were taught to them by people that they trust, men that they trust. And I'm not saying that this story, again, doesn't deserve to be talked about. I think it really does. But the thing is, Muslims, like this entire video is about, aren't represented enough in media. And when we are, it's always with negative depictions. If we're going to talk about ISIS and how they were able to do what they do through young women, let's also show a side of Muslims that is different from that, a more authentic and realistic side of Muslims where we really are just regular people following our religion, sitting with our families, eating with other people who aren't Muslim, and just enjoying life while also practicing our faith. The show doesn't take a second to really show or shed some light on everyday Muslims who aren't terrorists and who don't believe in terrorism. Whenever a terrorist attack goes down, no matter what part of the world it happens, Muslims sit at home just as upset, hurt, and scared as everybody else. These quote-unquote Islamic groups, we don't identify with them. We really don't. That's like saying every white Christian identifies with the Ku Klux Klan, who were also an extremist group. They were extreme Christians. There are people who are going to use religion as a shield to defend their violence and their hatred towards other people. But that doesn't mean that everybody under that religion believes what they're saying. ISIS has definitely made a rep for themselves, but they have also made a rep for all Muslims because they have so blatantly spoken about Islam. But the things that they say are not the things that all Muslims believe in, because we don't believe in that. Islam does not spread hate or hatred or hate crimes. That's just what the extremist groups do, and they justify that with religion. I really wish that the show took a second to again show some Muslim characters who are really just people who believe in the faith wholeheartedly and not with hatred in their hearts. The show really did even scare me, because I'm looking at this show and I'm really seeing how a non-Muslim might watch this show and start to think that all Muslims think this way, that all Muslims act this way, and that these are the conversations that we're having at home, that terrorism is okay, that this is how to spread the religion, that this is what the religion wants us to do, when that is not true. When it comes to something like this, you really do have to show two sides of the story, because when you're representing an already marginalized group of people, you've got to show more than just the negatives. Otherwise, people are going to just believe the negatives. And finally, the last myth, which is that Muslim women are oppressed by their families and the men in their lives. One of the most harmful stereotypes around Islam that is reinforced in the media is that Muslim women are forced to wear a hijab. Women are forced to wear a hijab out of their will and are only liberated when that hijab comes off, and this often happens through the influence of a male counterpart or love interest. In the same article that I was reading, former U.S. First Lady Laura Bush declared, and I quote her, saying, "The fight against terrorism is also a fight for the rights and dignity of women." The article says, immediately after her speech, the State Department released an 11-page report on the Taliban's quote-unquote war against women, and Hollywood took note of that white feminist trope, saving Muslim women, which also obsessed over Muslim women's sexuality. Let's look at a show like Elite, where the only Muslim character on the show has to take off her hijab in order to be allowed to attend her highly prestigious and academically exceeding school. Now, if she doesn't want to fight the fight of having to stand up for herself and wear the hijab regardless of what the school administration team says, fine. But in the beginning of the show, she does fight them off, or at least try to. But then later in the show, she ends up representing Islam as a religion which confines her and doesn't really let her truly express herself or explore her sexuality. Her love interest, Guzman, interferes with her father, and there are even scenes of her father aggressively pulling her out of class in front of everyone else, while Guzman tries to tell him to back off. This again shows that whole white savior trope where a person of color needs to be saved by the white person, and it also depicts Muslim men as aggressive and extremist. There's even an example of this in an episode of Sex and the City, where a group of Muslim men crowd around a woman, a white woman, and scream the word haram, which means forbidden, when her purse empties out in the streets and there are condoms all around her. A lot of people found this scene in the show to be very comedic and really hilarious, but if you really think about it, it's so harmful to depict Muslim men as men who are actively restricting and trying to police a woman's sexuality and outwardly showing their disgust in her sexual liberation. Especially if you put a white woman in the center of this situation. This is not another Arab woman we're talking about. If this was another Arab woman in the scene, then yeah, it would open up the conversation of, men within the community trying to restrict a woman's sexuality, and it would allow for that conversation to flow. But when you put a white woman in the scenario, well, it's feeding into another harmful trope that white women are always in danger of men of color, and in this case, Muslim Arab men. There's also a movie called Hala, which is another example of a story which portrays a woman being forced into her religion and her veil being a constant barrier and restraint over her until her white knight in shining armor comes in to save her, encouraging her to remove her hijab and follow her passion, essentially liberating her from her oppression. It demonizes Muslim men and Muslim parents and attempts, at least, to wire society into believing that these Islamophobic views against the hijab or Islam entirely is there to set Muslim women and children free. As if you telling a Muslim woman that she should be able to show her hair if she wants to is you giving her freedom, is you hiding her freedom, is you caring about her freedom. When instead what you're really doing is restricting that woman from being able to actually express herself, which might be to wear the hijab. All the women in my life who I know that wear a hijab because they want to, because that's what they want to do, that's what they're comfortable with. And especially when we talk about feminism, a lot of white feminists forget that for some women, showing off skin and being skin out is a sense of liberation. But for other women, being covered and being reserved is their feeling of liberation. And movies like this that use this extremely harmful myth only dub Islam as this religion that oppresses women and oppresses the people a part of it, that people are forced into Islam by their families or by the men in their lives, their fathers, their older brothers. This is not the truth for everyone, but it's the only truth that we seem to see on the media. My family, for example, never ever forced me to wear a hijab. When I was about in the 5th grade, I chose to wear one on my own will because I genuinely am a religious woman and I wanted to wear a hijab. And over some time, I realized that I wasn't gonna respect the hijab entirely because I knew that some days I would wear it and some days I would feel the need to take it off. So just like I chose on my own to wear the hijab, I also chose again to take it off. That doesn't mean that I gave up on my religion or that I strayed away from my religion or that the hijab was oppressive me. I just personally didn't feel that connection to it, so I took it off. But there are Muslim women that I know who wear the hijab and wear it proudly, and if you were to take that away from her, you would be taking away her sense of freedom. I've also grown up in a Muslim family which has always used Islam as a way of spreading peace and love, and has always taught me to be a good person before anything else. And when I talk about my religion with my friends or with my other family members, that's usually what it really is, about love, peace, and doing good things on this earth so that in the afterlife we have a good afterlife. I'm so tired of seeing the media make it seem like Muslim families are forceful and force their children into the religion instead of the children themselves being interested in picking up the religion on their own will. I'm not saying that these stories aren't true. There are Muslim women who are forced into wearing hijab. There are Muslim children who might not believe in their religion as they grow older, who are forced to by their families. But like I said, if that's the only narrative that we're getting, it's the only narrative people are going to believe, and it's the only reality people are going to think is true. When that's not the case, there are so many different stories and narratives that surround Muslim people, and these negative storylines are the only ones that are being represented in the media, which is exactly why people think that Islam is an extremist religion and that Islamic men and Muslim men are terrorists and Muslim women are oppressed and Muslim children are being forced to do something that they don't want to do. You know, I talked about this on a podcast I did with my friend Michael, which I will link in the description box below, but I think it's really important to watch movies about different people and about different stories from around the world, because movies and film and media really do play a really big role in how we perceive one another and how we interact with other people. And if all we're seeing of Muslim people is this, all of this, the only interactions people are going to think they can have with Muslim people are going to be filled of bias and fear. All of this being said, this comes to an end of my video. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video and if you enjoyed the topic, please do check the links down in my description box below. The articles that I used to research on this topic were very educational and very insightful, so if you want to learn more, please do check them out. I'm also going to link a bunch of Muslim artists who have been changing the game and who are absolutely fantastic and deserve some attention, and I would highly recommend that you guys check them out as well. Take care, y'all, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.